basically, we're looking at teachings of the Bhagavad-gita as it is, the translation by A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. And so we were hoping everyone had a copy of the book. That way you can read through it. Everyone else seemed to have their own copies at different times. If you don't have a copy, please contact Vrishni and we will make sure that you get one. So we discussed about how the Bhagavad-gita, which is down here, is part of a huge volume of text, Sanskrit texts coming from India, which focus really on the teachings of and the origins of yoga and meditation, karma, reincarnation, like that. And there's like I said, huge masses of texts. And these are all the great texts of India that the ancient sages and sadhus and holy men and saintly persons, or the great yogis, they would have all studied these texts. And Bhagavad-gita is considered the source book, really, of all knowledge about yoga, meditation, karma, reincarnation, like that. And we discussed about how the Gita, we'll be looking at the Gita in a sort of sandwich form, just to make everybody hungry. It's around dinner time now. So, and how the Gita has the first 6, it has 18 chapters in total. The first 6 chapters are about karma yoga. The last 6 chapters are about jnana yoga. And the middle 6 chapters are about bhakti yoga. And so a sandwich is usually known by what's in the middle, because that's really the most important thing. If someone just gives you 2 slices of bread, you're probably not going to be so happy. But if it's got some nice vegetarian or vegan fillings in the middle, then you'll be very happy. So bhakti yoga is the important essence, really, of the Gita, and the kind of substance of what the Gita is all about. So we'll come to that a bit later. So we started looking at the first chapter of the Gita, which is a chapter that helps to set the scene. And we described a little bit about the scene, which is, actually, I'll come to that in a minute after I introduce the characters. First, we discussed about how the actual Bhagavad-gita that you may have your copy looks, and how it may be a little confusing for you at first, because it's written in a way that kind of is for scholars, but it's also for a novice and a new person as well. And it has the original Sanskrit. The ancient Sanskrit is also known as Devanagari, which means the language of the gods. So this is ancient script or text. And this is what's called the Roman transliteralization. So this is that script that's been transferred into Roman letters so that we can read it. Those of us who just only read English, those who read Hindi or Sanskrit can easily read that. So then in the book, it shows the Roman transliteralization, and then it will have a translation of the Roman transliteralization, so you can actually read the text. And then after that, there's also what's called a purport, and the purport is a commentary by the author based on many commentaries given in over previous generations and centuries, really, of great sages and sadhus who have spoken about the Bhagavad-gita. So like that, this is what you'll find when you open the book. So you shouldn't be so bewildered. If you understand and know how to navigate around it a little bit, it will help you to make sense and for things to be a little clear. We also discussed how there are many personalities and names in the Bhagavad-gita that, especially for us, some of us coming from the West, we're used to names like John, Bob, Bill, Sue, Sarah, like that. And we have names like Dhritarashtra and Sanjay, and names that we think, wow. So The names can be a little bit challenging, but with a little bit of practice, you get used to them and they make sense. So Dhritarashtra, this is Dhritarashtra here, and he's a blind king. He was born blind, and really the kingdom was meant to be his. But according to the rules of rulership, or the Kshatriya law, the laws of the kingly people, then it's explained that if you're blind, then you're not qualified to rule over the kingdom. So therefore, the kingdom was passed on to his younger brother Pandu, and he was the ruler of the kingdom. We'll discuss a little bit more about that later. But in this picture, there's also Sanjay, and Sanjay is kind of like he's a mystic. And he's sort of like, in medieval England times, there was the kings and they had their magicians or their wizards, like Merlin. We all have heard of Merlin the magician or Merlin the mystic. So in the same way, he is a great yogi, Sanjay, and he has the mystic power of kind of extrasensory perception, that he can see things that are happening very far away. And he is sort of the eyes of Dhritarashtra. So he is the eyes of the king. And as we go on, we'll understand that he's conveying what's happening on the battlefield. And this setting of the Gita is really a battle. And the battle is, it's a fratricidal war, which is a battle between a family. So this kingdom has been split primarily because Dhritarashtra and his sons want to rule the kingdom, but actually the kingdom is the rightful claim of Pandu's sons. So Pandu passed away. Dhritarashtra took over the kingdom for some time until the sons grew up. But now that they've grown up, Dhritarashtra's sons do not want to let the kingdom go, and they want the kingdom. So they have tried many ways to actually kill the sons of Pandu or exile them so that they can't claim the kingdom. Nevertheless, they came back and they wanted their claim of the kingdom, and this has created a war. And in the middle of this battle, this huge battle that takes place, is a conversation that happens between Arjuna and Krishna, whom we'll introduce in a moment. And that conversation is called the Bhagavad-gita. And Bhagavad-gita, literally translated, Bhagavan means God and Gita means song. So it is literally translated as the song of God. And we explained this term Bhagavan in one of the other courses that we did in quite some depth. Duryodhan is the oldest son of Dhritarashtra, and he's really the force for wickedness, I guess you could say, and the force of evil. He's the bad guy. He is the bad guy, and he just wants the kingdom for himself, and he's basically prepared to do whatever he needs to do to ensure that the kingdom becomes his, and he's really willing to stoop to all different levels. He also has quite a few brothers, 100 or 99 brothers, in fact, and they kind of represent this force of evil in the Bhagavad-gita, and they're known as the Kauravas. The Pandu's sons are known as the Pandavas, and they have five sons, and they're Yudhisthira, Bhima, Arjuna, Nakul, and Sahadev. You won't be tested on the names, so don't worry. So they really represent the force of goodness or positivity in the Bhagavad-gita. And Arjuna especially is a great warrior and personality who is kind of one of the main characters, if not the main character. He is questioning. And you can see behind me, just here, this is Arjuna here. And Arjuna is really questioning the war. He doesn't want to fight, even though he's been trained to the highest level, and he's respected as one of the greatest, if not the greatest archer of his time. And even though he's been trained his whole life to be a warrior, to be a fighter, and to fight for righteousness, and to fight for dharma, but unfortunately, because in this war it's a fratricidal war, he becomes overwhelmed with grief, and the fact that he has to fight against his cousins, and who are like his brothers. He has to fight against other people also. He has to fight against his grandfather, or someone whom they treat as if like a grandfather. He's the grand uncle of the Pandavas, and his name is Bhishma, and he helped to raise them and look after them while they were growing up. And he's really such a profound character of righteousness, but somehow because of his position, he's forced to fight on the side of Dhritarashtra. And this kind of makes him a bit of a bad guy, even though he's really a good guy. So it's really hard for Arjuna to want to fight against him. Also, Arjuna's teacher, his guru, his spiritual master, Drona, he is also on the side of the Kauravas, even though he's also a righteous person. But both of them are obliged to the crown. So whoever is in the seat as the king, they're sort of obliged by duty to fight for the king. So in this way, Arjuna is really, really overwhelmed by the fact that he has to fight against such great souls. And that means if push comes to shove, he may even have to kill them. And he doesn't want to do this. So this is really heart-wrenching for him. It's overwhelming. And as we'll discuss a little bit more later, he really finds himself questioning this whole act. And he really just wants to run away from the situation and retreat, go on a retreat. He wants to go on a retreat to the forest and just live amongst the sages in the forest and the sadhus. But what happens is his very dear friend and cousin, Krishna, he actually starts to kind of, how do you say, coach him. He starts to try to coach him that no, he has a duty, and his duty is to actually to fight, and he needs to stay on the battlefield, and he needs to see this through despite whatever the challenges and tests are. So we discussed a lot about how we all face different kinds of challenges, and sometimes we want to run away from things, and we may feel like we can't handle it anymore. It's become too intense for us. It's too much. And we want to just run away, or we want to ignore things. That's also a big challenge we often face. The dishes in the kitchen sink that we like to ignore, and we hope they'll just go away one day. Or, you know, cleaning up the front room, or hoovering, or cleaning up our room. You know, we just like to ignore things sometimes in hopes that they'll take care of themselves. But very often they don't, and it kind of comes back to give us some problems later. So Krishna, he's not just an ordinary person, but he is considered to be actually the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So although he's taking an ordinary role as the chariot driver of Arjuna, but throughout the course of the Bhagavad-gita, his true identity is revealed as God himself incarnate or manifest here in the material world to actually speak to Arjuna and inspire him, and also to leave behind the teachings of the Bhagavad-gita so that all of us for generations to come could be benefited. So like that. We got into this a little bit. I won't spend too much time, but just a little bit about the family history of the Pandus. So there's a long family history, and you can see Bhishma is back here, and then you have Pandu that I mentioned, and Dhritarashtra and his wife, and then Kunti and Madri, and you have the 5 Pandavas. So like this, there's a lot of history there, and there's always intrigue. It's like if you read the Mahabharata, which is the book in which the Bhagavad-gita is found, then you'll see that from the opening pages, there's so much intrigue and politics and different things that are happening that really just keep you on edge the whole time. So the setting of the scene that we finally came to last time is this. And We're at the beginning of the Bhagavad-gita, and the start of the conversation. And if you look closely, you can see here that there is many people who have gathered for this war, and there are two sides, and they all pretty much know each other, and they've, because of their loyalties to either Arjuna and the Pandavas, or their loyalties to Duryodhana, they're forced to be on one side or the other. And in the same way in our life, there's also often polarization. Recently, we've seen in the politics in America, lots of polarization, people choosing one side over the other, and with the whole Brexit vote, and even with the pandemic, we see that people are polarized over these things. They have opinions and strong views and values. And so these kind of things cause people to have different angles of perspective on situations, and that can sometimes lead to either strong disagreements, or in this situation, a serious war. And Arjuna has found himself in a very distressed situation, feeling very lonely, very overwhelmed. He's not really sure what he should do. I guess his heart is kind of telling him, you shouldn't fight, you should just leave. And maybe his mind is saying, maybe you should stay, or his intelligence, but he's not really sure. So you can see here, he's laid down his bow and arrows. He's kneeled down. It's described that he has, he's shaking, tears are coming from his eyes, and he starts to beg Krishna, please give me some advice. I need some guidance. And this is one of the famous verses in the beginning of the second chapter, but where he actually requests, Krishna, please give me some guidance. So sometimes we also feel alone or unqualified, and we wish for something other than what we have, or, the grass often seems greener on the other side. And the first few times that I read the Bhagavad-gita, I was convinced that Krishna was wrong, because Krishna kind of encourages Arjuna to fight. And I thought, well, who is this Krishna guy? Why is he trying to convince him to fight? We're all into peace, right? Yoga, meditation means peace and love. How can there be peace in the middle of a war? But actually, this whole book is about teaching us how to actually find real, genuine, deep, profound peace. And sometimes that may mean that we need to do things that force us into action, and we also have to act in a proper way in the here and now, in order to prevent reactions that may come in the future. So that's a big topic of the Bhagavad-gita, which we'll discuss as we go through. So this is kind of to catch us up to where we're at the moment. And we stopped off last time at a lesson number 1. We have these throughout the Gita, periodically throughout this session. And lesson 1, if you recall, was about how it's explained that one's greatness can be estimated by their ability to tolerate provoking circumstances. And so we all have to deal with provoking circumstances, especially right now. We're all being provoked by the circumstances of the pandemic, either having to stay in our houses, our rooms. Many of you may have thought, for all of you, these are the years of your life to enjoy, and you go to university to not just study, but to have fun, to associate with other people, and get to know other people and experience the culture. And now you're stuck in a room and talking to people on the computer all day long, burning your eyeballs out of your head, staring at a computer screen all day. And so this is a provoking circumstance. So how are we going to deal with these provoking circumstances? So this is really a powerful lesson for us. And we discussed last time that this idea and principle of tolerance is a whole separate session that we can maybe do in the future, and just look at this principle of tolerance. But unfortunately or fortunately, these provoking circumstances, they're not going to stop. we may think that we can do some magic thing and prevent them, but the circumstances in the world and in life, they'll keep coming. The point is not that we can change the external world, but that we have to transform our internal world. And by the transformation of our internal world, we can deal with the external world in a different way. So it means when we're confronted, we do not get so disturbed so easily inside, but we're able to maintain a focused consciousness and deal with the situation in a way that needs to be dealt with properly. But these testing circumstances or challenging situations, although we don't like them, but they actually can help us. They're opportunities for us to make progress and advancement. And we'll see in life that many times we start to repeat similar types of challenging circumstances. We'll think, why does this keep happening to me? Well, we should really ask, why does it keep happening to you? Why is it happening to you and not happening to other people around you? How come one person deals with one set of circumstances and another has to deal with other circumstances? So the thing is that the world is so constructed that each and every one of us is getting private lessons, just exactly what we need according to the level that we're at in order to make progress. And the ultimate goal should be spiritual progress. And that spiritual progress will be impeded by some materially provoking circumstance. And we really need to start to understand how to overcome that. So I'll just stop for a moment and take a breath of fresh air and see if anyone has any questions or anything they'd like to ask so far to bring us up to speed.
No, all good.
Everyone okay?
Yeah, good.
Okay. Okay, so here's an interesting thing. Anyone has ever experienced that when you don't want to do something, you often have a lot of really good excuses?
Yeah.
I see a few smiling faces. I'll take that as confirmation. Mostly what I see is empty black boxes. So. But usually if we don't want to do something, we always have really, really good excuses. I remember feeling like I learned early on in life that when I don't want to do something, I've always got plenty of good excuses, but usually there's just one good reason why I should do it. And I want to avoid that good reason at all costs and just focus on the excuses. So in the Bhagavad-gita, in the conversation between Krishna and Arjuna, Arjuna gives many, many excuses. Well, not so many. He gives 5, in fact, or the great saintly teachers, the sages, they describe that he gives these 5 specific arguments to Arjuna. And it's just like this. If we have a good friend, we ask a good friend for advice, and when they give us the advice that we know we should take, but we don't really want to take it, then we say, yeah, but, and we give it the old yeah, but program. So yeah, you're right, yeah, but what about this? And but what about that? And but what about this? So Arjuna gave these different excuses, and these are different verses where he gives these reasons. So the first one is out of compassion. Now the thing is that, you know, as I explain these excuses, all of you are probably going to agree with Arjuna. And like I said, I have to agree as well. They're really good excuses. So the first one is out of compassion, and we can understand that. And compassion is a quality that we all would want to develop. You know, if we, I think Ellie was talking earlier about her dog even, or your mom's dog, or the dog in the house, you know, whatever, whoever dog it is. But she was, you know, saying the dog is shaking, and, you know, and she feels like, oh, this poor little dog, you know, how can I help the dog? And, I mean, so that's compassion. We feel. Compassion means where we feel for another person. Sometimes it's called empathy. We feel, or sympathy. We feel for another person, and we think, I don't want to cause them harm, and I don't want them to hurt. How can I help them? So Arjuna is feeling this compassion, and he's thinking, you know, even if I have to look like a fool, even if I have to look like a weakling, and be embarrassed by leaving the battlefield, I'm prepared to take that on myself out of compassion, so that I don't kill anyone or upset anyone or offend anyone or hurt anyone. So this is a really good argument that he has for not fighting the battle. He also gives another argument, which is one that we also like to use, which is that we don't want to lose our opportunity for enjoyment, right? We often don't want to do the right thing because it's going to take too much time, and it may cost me. I may miss my favorite television program. I may miss a date with my boyfriend or girlfriend. I may miss so many things. I'm not going to have fun if I do this. It's not going to be fun, you know. Washing the dishes in the kitchen sink that have been there for a week is not going to be fun, and I'm going to, you know, I'm going to miss out on something that I'm going to enjoy. Because really, for most of us, we're very I-centric, you know. Life is really about I and me and mine, you know. It's all about what I want and how I'm going to enjoy. And anything that interrupts that enjoyment becomes an opposition to what we really want in life. So therefore, it's a good argument that I'm not going to enjoy, so why should I do it? The other thing, another argument that he gives is fear of sinful reactions. Of course, this term sinful can come across as very, very awkward, as if we're coming from Christian background. And, you know, sometimes for me, I grew up going to church as a young man, and to be honest, I really hated it. I liked Jesus. I thought he was probably one of the coolest people I'd ever heard about. But I really didn't like the guy who stood up at the front of the church saying, you're all sinners and you're going to go to hell, and if you keep sinning. And I thought, yeah, you know, really? I mean, isn't there another way? Can we discuss some other options, my dear friend? And then he sends around a bowl and he wants me to put money in it. I'm like, you just told me I'm going to hell and you still want my money. Okay, great. So as a young man, it didn't make much sense. But this idea of sin is an interesting concept. And if we look at it, the word sin, what is the English origin of the word sin? Well, it's actually an archery term. It's, you know, an archery term. And in archery, and in old archery back in medieval times, you would obviously shoot your arrow towards a bullseye, and your intention was to hit the bullseye, you know, you would shoot it towards a target, and the goal was the bullseye. Now, if you somehow missed the bullseye, or you were off the target, that was called a sin. So it's an archery term, which in essence means you missed the mark. You're off the mark. You're not on target. Does that make sense? So in one sense, if we were to take the idea of life being a spiritual pursuit, and if the goal is a spiritual perfection, and if one becomes absorbed in, let's say, a material pursuit that deviates me from that spiritual perfection, that would be considered a Sin. Would be off the mark. You're not on target anymore. What's the goal? The goal is like a spiritual emancipation, a spiritual renaissance, or a spiritual enlightenment. And because I get caught up in a materialistic pursuit, I'm off the path. And if I'm off the path, that's considered a
sin.
So those activities that may distract us from the topmost goal, that would be considered a sin. And of course, for every action, there's an equal and opposing reaction. We discussed this in the previous talk. That's the principle of the law of karma. So if we perform activities that are off the path or off the mark, they're also going to have some reactions. So Arjuna was using as an argument this idea that he was afraid of suffering reactions for sinful activity. And what was the sinful activity? He was feeling that by fighting this war and killing others or maiming them or hurting them, it's a bad activity and I'm going to get bad reactions for it. Does that make sense? Everyone's with me on that? Yeah. So like that. Then the next one is destruction of family tradition. So he also gives arguments that basically, as kshatriyas, as warriors, as military men, and those of the kind of princely order, our role is to protect society. And especially, of course, these are the days of chivalry, and we have lots of ladies on the Zoom call this evening. So this is the days of real gentlemen, ladies. You know, these were like, you know, Arjuna, if you can see behind me, Arjuna, he's a strapping lad. He's handsome. You know, he's got a big, you know, he's the epitome of tall, dark, and handsome. He's got a big chest, you know, bulging muscles. You know, and he's like, he is like, I don't even know who to describe him like in the modern day comparison. And these are like real gentlemen. So their whole mood is like, you know, we're meant to protect the ladies, you know? So they're like, they would step in front of a flaming arrow and take the hit for the, you know, the woman that they love. And we'll discuss this more near Valentine's Day, you know, the art of true love. So Arjuna's feeling like, if we don't protect the ladies, if we don't, and if I'm on the battlefield and I kill all of these men, and then the men die, then who will be there to protect their wives? Who will be there to protect their daughters? Who will be there to look after the ladies? And in the absence of these men to help and to protect and secure them, then, you know, there will just be a whole ruination of our culture. So I can't do it. And he gives that as an argument. And then his final argument comes at the beginning, as I mentioned in the second chapter, where he basically just becomes completely indecisive. And although he's been giving good arguments, and sometimes we may have this experience as well, where we're talking to someone, yeah, well, I shouldn't do it like this. Maybe I shouldn't do it like that. And then we just go, I don't know what I should do. Completely indecisive, and we sort of talk ourselves around in circles to the point where we just don't know what to do. So I guess, you know, my question to all of you is, have you ever found yourself in any of these argument situations? You know, you ever use these as any arguments? You have compassion, you know, or you know, compassion's a good reason why, oh no, I couldn't do that. It'll upset somebody, you know, I couldn't possibly do that. And loss of enjoyment, we definitely don't want to do it. Or I don't want to do that because, you know, I'll get a bad reaction if I do that. I won't do that. Or we're afraid that we'll upset our parents or our brother or our sister, you know, or our family members, will upset them in some way. And or that we just really become indecisive and we really don't know what to do anymore, like that. So probably we've all experienced these to some extent. So Arjuna is giving these as arguments. The challenge is that sometimes you just have to do what the right thing is to do, no matter how many good arguments you have. sometimes we give good arguments, but in our heart, we really know that at the end of the day, I should do this, you know? So that means that, especially in the situation with Krishna and Arjuna, what can happen is that when he becomes completely indecisive, he requests Arjuna to please instruct him. And that means that Arjuna is going to have to be ready to listen. And the thing is, if we're asking someone to help us and give us advice, but we don't listen, then they can't really help us. So even though they can be giving the best advice, but it really comes down to whether we have become humble enough to hear, or if we stay proud and think we know all the answers. And I'm sure none of you are very proud people. You all seem like very humble and kind-hearted souls. So, but sometimes we can be really proud thinking we know everything and we don't really need help. But often we do need an outside perspective on our life so that we can get a little insight into what I may be really dealing with. So this is kind of lesson 2 that actually in the Bible it explains that pride leads to disgrace, but with humility comes wisdom. So this is a really, really powerful quote and a thought that sometimes we just have to be humble. And what does humility mean? Again, that's a very, very big topic that we could get into. But humility means that I'm willing to accept that I don't have all the answers, and maybe someone else does have the answers. And in that mood of humbleness, then I can hear. But if I'm proud, then I won't be able to hear. And there's a saying also coming from, I think, the Jewish philosophy and also in Christianity, which says it's easier to get a camel through the eye of a needle than to get a proud man into the gates of heaven. Anyone's ever heard that before? So actually, I had a friend who studied a lot of theology, very advanced person, and he explained to me that actually that statement comes from evidently to get into Jerusalem, because it used to be a huge trading hub many years ago in biblical times. And they used to bring camels loaded with things to trade and sell in the marketplace. And in order for them to be allowed in, they had to go through something that was called the eye of the needle. And it was shaped like this, kind of like the camel. And basically, you could only have the camel loaded up with so much. So in order for the camel to get through with maximum weight on its back, they would train the camels to get down on their knees and crawl through the eye of the needle into the city so that they could trade maximum things. And the implication is that the camel, even though laden with so much, but if it's willing to get down on its knees, kind of thing, like you would get down on your knees to beg or in a humble state, then it can get in. But a proud man cannot even get into the gates of heaven because he's not willing to bow down. He's not willing to get down on his knees. So it's a very interesting concept that permeates all different types of spiritual paths and religion. But we know that humility, it is really the key. And that key becomes the success for Arjuna. Because although he placed many arguments before Krishna, but when he comes to this point where he gets down on his knees and he folds his hands and he says to Krishna, I just don't know what I'm going to do. I need help. And sometimes life brings us to this point. The pressure around us brings us to the point where we feel like we're going to break. It happens to many people. the thing is, before we break, it's good if we at least bend a little bit. And sometimes that means we need to bend in order to seek guidance. If we're so proud that we feel like we can't get guidance, then we can't be helped. Having worked with the anonymous groups over the years, they have their program for overcoming addiction, which, as we mentioned once before, one of the primary points is that you have to seek a higher power. You have to understand that we're helpless in many ways. We can help ourselves, but we need help. Only with the help of others can we make progress to overcome some of the limiting or debilitating or challenging situations. So that really requires humility to accept that I have a problem, that I can't overcome it on my own, and to ask someone, please, can you help me? Does that make sense? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. Again, thank you for those two wonderful souls whose cameras are on that I can see your heads nod. So it really helps. Please don't turn your cameras off or else I'll drift into oblivion. So this brings us to the beginning of chapter 2. Anyone has any questions or comments at this point?
I have a question.
Yes, dear Fernanda.
Because I wasn't seeing Arjuna as proud, or although he was trying to avoid the unavoidable, right?
Mm-hmm.
But wouldn't his position of doubt be justified in a way, given the whole circumstance of he fighting his own, and he didn't want to do that, and everything that a war would implicate?
Yeah, great question. Really good question. So in essence, yes, you're right. He just had doubts. The difference between the pride and humility is that Arjuna eventually said, please give me some instructions and help me to understand what is right. Whereas there are many people who just will not back down, right?
Yeah, yeah.
No matter what, even I don't care what you say, even to that point, it doesn't matter. I will not. And we see that even in like marital relationships amongst brothers and sisters, sisters and sisters. Yeah.
Sisters and sisters, yeah.
Yeah.
And, famous saying, you always have to have the last word. It's just like, and until somebody, it's like I have this, for there to be an argument, there has to be resistance.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes from both sides. So if there's a fight, it means there's two sides who are holding their position and trying to fight to prove the position to the other. But as soon as one person relinquishes that and gets, let's say, down on their knees and says, all right, I accept, it was me, I was wrong, you're right, but nobody wants to do that because it's too important to be right.
Yes.
And that's
I know.
we're touching pushing the buttons here tonight. Being right is one of the most intoxicating drugs on the planet. Forget all the other drugs. Pride fuels us to think that we are right about everything. Even when we know we're wrong, we still don't want to give up because we're so afraid of looking like a fool.
Yeah.
Everyone's afraid of looking like a fool. The glory of Arjuna is that he wasn't afraid of looking like a fool, because he understood that what he wanted to do was the right thing, even if he had good excuses and arguments, and he presented them, but he wasn't sure, and he wanted to be sure that he was going to do the right thing. So he had to accept that he just didn't know and he could be wrong. So please help me.
Fantastic.
But if we hold on to what we think as if it's the be all end all absolute truth and I know it and it's a fact and I'm right, all that is pride. And what's the famous saying? Pride cometh before a fall. So if you don't voluntarily get down on your knees, then later you'll be forced to, because you'll have a fall, because it will just come out in the end. You know, it comes out ultimately. So you can only hide for so long before the truth becomes revealed, and then you get humiliated. So better you just stop in the beginning, and you can try this, and in your own self, you can try this, because inevitably you will have a disagreement with someone in the next month, not the next hours.
Hour.
Yeah, hours. So you're gonna have you and your we got some sisters here who are living in the same house. So it's like, why didn't you wash the dishes? Why didn't you make this? Why didn't you do that? Who did this? I did it. No, you didn't. You said, I said. Ay, 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 you know. Does it sound familiar, ladies? You
Yeah.
both laugh.
Well, according to my
Very.
sister, because she's the oldest, she's always right.
Yes,
Yeah.
of course.
It's easily settled.
Okay, yeah, we've got the camera on the two younger sisters here. Oh, I see. There's oh, they've come online. Now they're like, yes, well, that's right. I'm older. I'm wiser. And you-
Exactly. That's what she says.
Wow. And this is the thing about culture that's very interesting. But if we keep humility as a, let's say, an arrow in our quiver, or if it just becomes a part of our natural functioning, then you would be surprised the impact and power that humility has. Most people are afraid to be humble because they think people will walk all over them. But if your sister comes to you and says, you should do this, I'm the older sister, you know, I'm right. And if you really mean it, and you just say, my dear Marcella, older sister, you are right. You are like one of the wisest people I've ever met. Whatever you say, I will do my best to try and make you happy, because you're my older sister. And out of respect as the older sister, I will do that. Marcella, now, if she's a manipulative person, will torture you for the rest of your life. She also has a little bit of humility in her heart. Instead of her heart being filled with pride, then she'll think, oh God, Fernanda, that's so kind. And in her heart, she'll be like, okay, well, maybe I don't know everything. I mean, almost everything, but in this situation, okay, well, what do you think? You know, it's amazing how, again, if we don't resist, if someone finds a way to just give in, there's no resistance for the other person. So there's no foundation for argument. And as I often say, that if there's an argument and you get down on the ground and say, look, I'm really sorry, you know, I'm lower than straw in the street, please forgive me. And if that person starts kind of kicking you in the head, well, everyone's going to get to see who the real bad guy is in the situation, you know? So there's really no loss in taking a humble position. But it's not easy because, unfortunately, we're also proud.
Yeah.
But in this situation, Arjuna proved his greatness by being willing to take the humble position and to hear from someone. And look, he's one of the most, if not the most reputed and feared warrior on this battlefield. And he's in the middle of the two armies with his bow and arrow on the ground, and is on his knees begging. And you can imagine how humiliating this would be for someone who's like, you know, he's a macho guy. Come on, he's Arjuna, you know. I'm not getting down on the floor. I'm not asking anyone for anything. I'm the man, you know. So if he maintained that kind of status, then we would consider him different. But because he did this, it shows his greatness. It doesn't show his weakness. It shows his greatness. So that's kind of the thing. Does that make a little bit of sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Great. Anyone else? Any thoughts or questions?
I was just wondering, so what if you're like, so there's two people in an argument, but
Yes.
so one of them takes the first step in kind of saying, okay, you're right and I'm wrong, but then that person doesn't really believe that, like inside, doesn't really have that feeling. So
You mean the person who says it doesn't really mean it, they just kind of
yeah,
give it? Well, yeah, there's a couple of things there. One is that it's still better than holding on to a proud position and pretending. Of course, you can also be proud of your humility. I'm so humble. I gave in first, I'm the humble one here. So you can be proud in your humility. But the point is that really, if we do that, we should understand from a place of sincerity why we're doing it. But even if we do it just to stop the fighting and accepting, then sometimes I have a good story that I often tell at this point, but we don't have enough time, unfortunately. So that's the cliffhanger for this week. But yeah, usually the effect that it has, if someone gets down on the floor and says, I'm sorry, then the other person will also say, me too. No, I'm sorry also. I shouldn't have pushed it. I should have just let it go. Why did I make such a big deal out of it? And then the other person says, no, 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 you were right. It was me who was wrong. And the other says, no, 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 it was me. And then they start fighting about that. But usually if there is a little bit of humility in the heart of the other person, if one person gives in, usually the other person also gives in also. But really, we should understand, even if we don't feel that we're really wrong, but if we take at least 100% responsibility for our 50% of responsibility for the argument, does that make sense? We have to be 100% responsible for our 50%. And that means that I have to accept that it is possible that I could be wrong, even if I'm not wrong about the fact of what we're arguing about, but maybe I'm wrong to argue. Maybe I'm wrong to create such disturbance or pain in the mind and in the heart of another person that I actually do care about. Of course, if you're sisters, then you hopefully care about each other a little bit. And then you think, yeah, that's not right. So do I care that much? Do I really care that much about whatever it is, the dishes being left in the sink? I keep using that analogy. I don't know why. There must be some in the sink somewhere that need to be washed. Or, whatever, you left the toothpaste lid off the tube, or you didn't, I don't know, whatever you don't do. So, whatever it is it really worth breaking a relationship over? Probably not. Usually it's not. So at least I'm wrong for that. So let me just take responsibility. I may be right about the facts, but I'm wrong in the way that I'm dealing with the facts, because this person is so upset and now we're arguing, and that's not right. So that's what I'm apologizing for, the way I dealt with it. Not maybe about the facts, but about the way that I dealt with it. Maybe I called you a name. Maybe you left dirty dishes in the sink, but when I called you a stupid fat cow, that wasn't really so good. I didn't call anyone that. No, I'm just saying, really this or that, or I use some foul language. That's not so good. So at least I should apologize. At least I should be apologetic for that. So anyway, these are some thoughts about humility.
thank you.
It's not always so easy, but it's a big step, and you'll see that it starts to make a difference. There's a famous kind of life coach, maybe some of you have heard of him, Stephen Covey, and he did this book called The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. And the first habit that one should create and cultivate in one's life is to seek first to understand, and then to be understood. So if we seek first to understand others, then, but mostly we just want them to understand what I'm saying, right? We just want people to get my point. You aren't hearing me, but you haven't listened either, but you're still upset because they're not listening to you. But if someone takes the humble position and says, okay, what's your perspective on this? What's your angle? Let me first understand and really listen to what you're saying without thinking about how I'm going to argue back. Let me just really hear what your explanation is. That's taking a humble position. So in the same way, that's humility. And then, okay, now let me try to explain myself also from a humble position so that you can understand. And then sometimes it'd be like, oh, I get it. That's why you did that. I'm sorry. And it's just natural. But it always takes humility. Without humility, it's just a big battle of ego. Just big pride fighting against big pride. Or little pride, not to say anyone's big here on the screen. I didn't mean that as a derogatory comment, sorry. Okay, so I think that's me finished. I'm getting pinged by some people waiting to get in.